The first reader tonight will be Major Jackson. Major Jackson's books of poems include Leaving Saturn, University of Georgia Press, 2002, Hoops, W.W. Norton, 2006, Holding Company, Norton, 2010, and Roll Deep, published by Norton in 2015. Jackson is the Richard Dennis Green and Gold University Distinguished Professor in the Department of English at University of Vermont, Burlington, and a graduate faculty member of the Creative Writing Program at NYU. He serves as the poetry editor of the Harvard Review. Many of the references in Major Jackson's poetry, e.g., I better get it in my soul, are known to me, and many others are not. They all intrigue me to know more. The title of his most recent volume, Roll Deep, seemed to me as though it might come from football. I intuit a physicality there, a sense of simultaneous mobility and pleasurable stasis. Deep, too, as in profound. A more in-depth study revealed the phrase refers to the comfort zone of one's posse. In this case, Jackson extends that to his wife, Dee Dee, to whom the volume is dedicated, and their children, and beyond, via quotes from Lord Byron, Langston Hughes, and others. Jackson has always been extending in his poetry, from his first book, Leaving Saturn, which established in vivid detail his North Philadelphia roots, to recent poems from the ongoing sequence Urban Renewal, set in the Cyclades, Spain, Brazil, Kenya, and Italy. In the latter, lines blossom with a scale and languor akin to the grandeur of dactylic hexameter. Yet, this limning of a progression is false. Jackson was born worldly and continues to be from where he's from. Music heard and thought about, danced to, is the essential connective tissue, the continuizing force throughout Jackson's own musicality in verse. In Section 8, Block Party from Urban Renewal, published in 2002, Jackson writes, woofers stacked to pillars made a disco of a city block. And further on in the same poem, sampling both The Tempest and James Brown, musing on the DJ's ephemeral art and his own role in it all, at it all, comes this definition. Song broken down to a dream of song flows from my pen. Years later, in Section 23, Brazil, music in the form of the berimbau incites musings on slavery's legacy. Quote, you're the crisis I hear when I bend to kiss my son, or when, at a bar standing, see my brown face in a glass of rum. Major Jackson has an uncanny ear, an ability to weave a thought through innumerable subordinate clauses, keeping his goal firmly in mind and always returning to it. In his magisterial poem, Reverse Voyage, I am certain he intends us to hear the rhyme of alleys in line 4 with valley in line 41. This musicality underpins his humanist message. Please welcome Major Jackson to DIA.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Vincent. I really appreciate when poetry was meant for close readings. We act like it's the province and domain of academicians, but I think true poetry lovers get inside and kind of hear the music. And Vincent, I enjoy your introductions for that reason. I'm very grateful to be here at DIA. This is my second time reading at DIA, but not in this series. The first time I read here was part of the poetry bus tour. Do you remember that, David? That's when I saw you first read, actually. Yes, the poetry bus tour. This was a bus that started in Seattle and went across the the north and then circled back. It was a wonderful bus. I got on in, I think it was Boston, and got off in Philadelphia, where I'm from. But in between, we stopped here at Dia Beacon, and then Dia Chelsea. I think it was still in Chelsea. Friends are here, so got to acknowledge them, because where are we without friends? I want to thank Jane Kent and Jill Mosier and David Lehman and Andrew Mockler, and Arena is here. And more than friends, it's nice to meet people that you deeply admire, that you've been reading for a long time. So it's such a pleasure to read with Peter. So I'm going to launch into some new poems from a book that will be published early next year called The Absurd Man. The first poem is a riff off of Borges. Borges wrote a poem called Borges and I. And this became a writing assignment, I think somewhere in the early or mid-'90s, for poets to kind of give voice to their, whoa, hold it, Andre is here too. Kudrescu is also here. We have a long history from New Orleans. I'm happy you're here, man. 20 years we haven't seen each other, almost. So Borges inspired this poem, Major and I. Major and I, hand in hand, remove our dark suits, but the other Major prefers to undress in glass revolving doors. He is a fan of prohibition cocktails, whose potions afford him time travels of the landed gentry. I let Major sport his dangers, which magnify his ambitions, so he can write his grandiloquent poems, and thus ours is a compromised relationship. I, more cautious than a slug, and he the sampler of pythons. Major is a fan of Peruvian folk songs, wood panel libraries, rare colognes, and old issues of Esquire. I, on the other hand, prefer American football, treasury bills, and vintage sports cars. Only once did I try to escape his clutches, this other Major. For years, I survived his rank songs, which make the Spanish cantors weep. His fingers carry the bitter taste of coffee, which occasionally I sniff, for they are the color of ancient bark. Forgive his pretenses. He who wrote that last sentence. It is probably true he wrote most of this, but I am unsure, for I live just behind him, a single keystroke shy of his many thoughts. Beware his black rituals. The other Major flies in his daydreams, which means he's collecting a paradise of mirrors, where I sit studying the prose of Toomer, Morrison, and Faulkner. Surface though he is, master of the outside, he digs the gangsta lean and is more thankful than a sunroof top. His broken strings, like his stubble, issue forth, a wintry path at night for white walls. See what I mean? Major never won attendance awards. For sure, long ago, he left behind cigarettes and the guarded strips of lotto tickets, but cherishes still the big hit. Amid his charms, and you've a friend for life. He will send you sunflowers, true, even from his coffin, not true. And although he never learned to play the violin or the mouth harp, a radio plays like an all-night laundromat behind his eyes. And thus, he lives year-round in the boot camp of self-redemption. For this, the other Major needs lots of sky. You are that sky. This is a poem titled You Reader. And I've lived almost 2 decades in Vermont, and not once did I see a moose, which I thought was the quintessential New England experience. As one person said, who've lived there almost 3 decades. They're like unicorns. You rarely see them. But sure enough, I believe in poetry as conjure, and so I wrote this poem. And not too long afterwards, my moose showed up on Route 125. You reader, so often I dream of the secrets of satellites, and so often I want the moose to step from the shadows and reveal his transgressions. And so often I come to her body as though she were Lookout Mountain. But give me a farmer's market to park my martyred mass, and I will name all the dirt roads that dead end at the cubist sculpture called My Infinity. For I no longer light bonfires in the city of adulterers, and no longer smudge the cheeks of debutantes hurriedly floating across the high fruit of night. And yes, I know there is only one notable death in any small town, and that is the pig farmer. But listen, at all times, the proud rivers mourn my absence, especially when, like a full moon, you, reader, hidden behind a spray of night blooming, drift in and out of scattered clouds above lighthouses producing their artificial calm, just to sweep a chalk of light over distant waters. The flaneur tends a well-liked summer cocktail. I'm smiling because this was my I have several collaborators in the room. Then Jane Kent and I collaborated on this poem. The flaneur tends a well-liked summer cocktail, curbside on an ARP-like table. He's alone, of course, in the Arts District, as it were, legs folded, swaying a foot so that his body seems to summon some deep immensity from all that surrounds. Dust shadows inching near a late 30-ish couple, debating the post-galactic abyss of sex with strangers. Tourists ambling by, only to disappear into the street's gloomy mouth. A young Italian woman bending to retrieve a dropped Metro card, its black magnetic strip facing up. A lone speckled brown pigeon breaking from a flock of rock doves, then landing near a crushed fast food wrapper newly tossed by a bike messenger. The man chortling after a sip of flaxen-colored beer, remembering that in the Gospel of John, the body and glory converge, linked to incarnation, and so perhaps we manifest each other. A tiny shower of sparks erupting from the knife sharpener's truck, who daily leans a blade into stone. A cloudscape reflected in the rear windshield of a halted taxi, where inside a trans woman applies auburn lipstick. The warlike insignia on the lapel jacket of a white-gloved doorman who, opening a glass door, gets a whiff of a dowager's thick perfume and recalls bailing Timothy Hay as a boy in Albania. The woman distractedly watching a mother discuss Robert Cole Scott's lurid appropriations of modernist art over Niçoise salad suddenly frees her left breast from its cup, where awaits the blossoming mouth of an infant wildly reaching for a galaxy of milk. The sharp coughs of a student carrying a yoga mat, the day's last light edging high-rises on the west side so that they seemed rimmed by fire, just when the man says, and yet amidst the wages we pay, boarding the great carousel of flesh. Jane published that as a book, a fold-out book, and Andrew Mockler printed it, so I want to thank them. This is a poem called The Flag of Imagination Furled. Because the clock drummed, I never prophesied the tenets of cemeteries, nor found time to solve the great riddles in the narrow districts of my glass-cased cities. What overcame me All that running my forefinger down the wintry pages of my masters and my adversaries, touching their sentences like sculpted palaces, touring their villages of ink. I'm sure Nina Simone was there and helped to deepen the pouches beneath my eyes, even in gleeful Madrid, as I preached to a cloistered community of garlic cloves or spray-painted morning fog, making sure not to get too dizzy from the lash of geraniums lest they launch me into a spell of lyric wonder. Severe sadness, a cocoon of oppression. Nothing accounts for my frozen laughter in the proud cantinas, my meticulous lack of holy clamor as I scribbled toward some infinitude. How often I've wanted to lick the mirrors and pose questions to my footsteps. Of course, without the crisis of caves or politicians eating hungrily from their dark bowls of pocket watches. I've said too much. I've said too much. The soil overruns with honey. Porch lights blaze into the afternoons. I find it difficult to control my idioms. Only ask which direction the wind blows, and I will give you a history of my elms and cottonwoods, or my theft of fire. My brain plunders its orchard of speech. Watch the expressionist stains at the corners of my mouth, dark as blueberries, blossom into a symphony. I am too far from the land of hush to be useful. What is said must be said, so I say it. Inheritor of hieroglyphs and cave drawings, I keep the engines of hearsay fueled, an echo of the ancients, especially the Athenians. Leave me with your griefs and barefoot secrets, and rest assured I will secure your memory. And your name, like the rushing tremble of a wave heading to shore, will ricochet back into the deep sea of my sayings and bewilderments. Provide a backdrop of cheese and tapenades with a little Sauvignon from the Cederberg Mountains, and you can have a lifetime of constellations as you take in the great stone corée, unyielding in their slanting light. Winter. The boughs have been naked for weeks. Snowplows scrape the highway clean of its sugar. People withdraw into their nest and study the language of fire. A group of high school girls on their way home in the afternoon dark falls into an embankment of snow and flaps their arms and legs as though cloud swimming towards the coming world. The blank silence of dead earth forces us to gaze up, harvest the black music that belongs to all the eyes in the future, who will also turn to the spheres and study too whatever light to fill their emptiness. This is called Washington Square, and it's from, it continues this series of poems called Urban Renewal, which I began with my first book that Vincent generously quoted. This is dedicated to David Lehman. It's called Washington Square. And it was written one autumn. New York is full of terrific musicians who just play for us. And I think less than husking is what it's called. Less than husking, I think they're just happy to be in their music, be in their art. And this one particular autumn, there was this gentleman who was playing a piano in Washington Square, and he kind of started this poem, which led me to thinking about my grandfather, who was a great jazz man and auteur of himself in some ways. And he introduced me to the ink spots, which is where this poem ends. Washington Square. When all that cautions the eyes toward the imminent slide of autumn to Arctic winds, the canopy of English elm and sycamore leaves like colored coins fall and widen a hole, letting more light spill in. Heaven's alms to earth, whose ashen gray and white will soon be all the rage. And our guilty secret is the baby grand playing Glasses's Orpheus suite for piano. Nearby, Buto dancers writhe and almost upstage with white painted faces of horror, portraits of Nagasaki. And past the fountain's water plumes, a drug-riddled couple shared the smoldering remains of an American spirit, their grizzled dog roped to a shopping cart and frayed duffel bag, this city's updated version of the American Gothic. Our reddish-haired pianist lets the melancholic notes float to high rises on Fifth above its triumphal arch, like a film in reverse where the golden foliage is read by a poet as autumn's light pouring in. Don't get around much anymore. The ink spots Decca cover spins on the phonograph, and an era spiraling soft, then held by his gentle pen. This comes from another collaboration with my friend Joe Mosier. This is called Thinking of Frost, and I think most poets living in New England, particularly in Vermont, even if they don't want to, they feel compelled to write a poem in the shadow of Robert Frost. You have to make that high five to that tradition. Thinking of Frost. I thought by now my reverence would have waned, matured to the temperate silence of the bookish, or revealed how blasé I've grown with age. But the unrestrained joy I feel when a black skein of geese voyages like a dropped string from God, slowly shifting, when the decayed apples of an orchard amass beneath its trees like Eve's first party, when driving in the road, Vanna whites its crops of corn, whose stalks will soon give way to a harvester's blade and turn the land to a man's unruly face, makes me believe I will never soothe the pagan in me, nor exhibit the propriety of the polite. After a few moons, I'm loud this time of year, unseemly as a chevron of honking. I'm fire in the leaves, obstreperous as a New England farmer. I see fear in the eyes of his children who walk home from school as evening falls like an advanced trickle of bats. The sky pungent as bounty and chimney smoke. I read the scowl below the smiles of parents at my son's soccer game, their agitations, the figure of wind yellow leaves make of quaking aspens. This next section, a few poems, comes from a section called The Absurd Man Suite. And Albert Camus writes quite a bit about the absurd man in several books, most prominently in The Myth of Sisyphus, which is gave me the idea to give some body to this figure. He points to several absurd men, and you might be able to pick up, and we can talk afterwards, but you might be able to pick up who this might be. This is called X's. Maybe. I'll start with this one, Visitation. When his dead mother reappears in a storefront glass, behind him, sober as a midweek wake, he knows it's time to count his reflections. He worries when scars heal too fast, or when a departure of flames threads memory, which means another death roll could commence soon after he's gently rested a glass of Chardonnay and led to the throne of not enough love. Come here, sugar. Once he saw two women inside an afternoon and wondered if his mother traveled behind him, whistling his flophouse manhood into a recognizable stillness deeper than his cutthroat waltz. He slayed, and his body hardened into a rainy nightfall. The man he once was the plague of sororities, sleepwalking a vortex of honeysuckle and wild hearts. But let him glimpse himself too long, he will put a lantern brightness to his eyes, hoping to crowd out ghosts reaching like moths across eternity with broken wings. X's. You almost never see them strolling the grocery store meat section or standing on a train platform, head buried in the soft pages of some popular paperback. Nonetheless, they haunt the ambulance of your mind, traumatized on a gurney of your making, tended by first responders, trained angels who snip and share at tattered clothes to better access your breakups and hookups like discolored bruises and contusions, or worse, a bleeding heart that won't stanch, spurting and smearing its wild stream all over the fermented cave of your regrets. These are your fatalities, the ones who never recovered, who, though married, mortgage-free, and always on the move between Los Angeles and Madrid, come undone at the sight of your name, the ones who slammed hardest into the retaining wall of your insecurities, your maimed boyhood, your fraternal training whose lips, purse, and eyes go comatose when you appear bodiless, empty as a hologram, smiling back across screens at all their frozen faces. I'm going to read two more poems. And this is called I'll Fly Away. I'm best when I'm running full-throated towards the whitecaps in Truro, piping my woeful tune swell upon swell, keeping company with the red-winged blackbird, who, my ancient friend Jerry said, governed these parts with his running mate, the dusty miller. One ruled by land, the other by sea. One painted the air with swoops and trills and praised shafts of light. The other buried himself in sand, imitating tyrants, cursing the vast tongue of the ocean. This was years before Henry James and the Mayflower and the founding of the ballad, and years before William Bradford established his alehouse on Maine in Provincetown. Today, I run the shoreline with my neighbor's collie, blessing his dumb search for wet bark with a little jaunt of my own, exchanging dirges of our common dream of flight, my arms thrown back to lift my cape-like towel, thinking what would it have been like if there had been no footprints to study the way back to my beloved grief, if children had not waved my journey through seaweed and spindrift, if I would have lived all day watching schooners and barges edge toward Brooklyn, sipping my sweet glass of tea, dozing off from time to time, breakaphone lapping at my tired black feet. There was never a sound beside the sea except one, and that was my long sigh, the horseshoe crab heard as a whisper. And there was never a shadow sprawled above Truro, large as the one I cast, the retired governor saw as a crow. Little Orville and little Wilbur Wright must have jogged along a beach like this one, enraged to find no fresh sand to spike their imprints and no sea air free of brine or herring calls or mullets or jellyfish, and fallen down beside them as I have, grieving on occasion, waiting for water to come in quietly. And this is my last poem and it's called Obad, and it's for my wife Dee Dee, who's couldn't be here, so this is for her. Obad, you could be home boiling a pot of tea as you sit on your terrace, reading up on last night's soccer shot beneath the scarf of Ceres. You could be diving headlong into the waves of Cocoa Beach, or teaching Mao Zedong whose theories are easy to reach, or dropping off your dry cleaning, making the new Americans wealthier, or mowing your lawn, greening up. But isn't this healthier? Just imagine the hours you're not squandering away, nor the ant-like minutes frittered with a tentative fiancé. Your whole body agrees. You'd rather lie here like a snail and my arms crook, nude and oblivious to all emails. Yes, it's nearly 1 o'clock, but we have more reasons to kiss, to engage in small talk. For one, these blissful seasons are short, and tomorrow is never insured. So bounce downstairs, pour us glasses of whatever, a tray of crackers, Bosch pears, then let drop your sarong, the wind high on your skin, so we can test all day long the notion of original sin. Thank you.
Peter Schjeldahl was born in Fargo, North Dakota, and grew up in Minnesota. He dropped out of college and moved to New York City to pursue journalism. Schjeldahl has published the following books of poetry: White Country, Corinth Books, 1968, An Adventure of the Thought Police, Ferry Press, 1971, Dreams, Angel Hair Books, 1973, Since 1964, New and Selected Poems, Sun, 1978, and The Brute, Little Caesar Press, 1981. Schjeldahl has written on art for numerous publications, including Art Forum, Art in America, Vanity Fair, and Vogue. He was the art critic for The Village Voice from 1990 to 1998, and has since been a staff writer at The New Yorker. His writings on art and culture have been collected in 4 books of criticism, including The Hydrogen Jukebox, Selected Writings of Peter Schjeldahl, 1978 to 1990, and Let's See, Writings on Art from The New Yorker, published by Thames and Hudson in 2008. He lives in New York City. I should be writing the introductions to tonight's poetry readings, but Peter Schjeldahl's poetry keeps reminding me how poetry and life are inextricably intertwined for everyone, although only some are aware of it. From his earliest poems, published in the 1960s, to his latest, published in the 1980s, a clarity about who he is as narrator informs their progress, down the page and across time. Schjeldahl is at his best when his poetry seems least experimental. Then he becomes the classicist, rare for his times, able to take in the big, even cosmological picture, while always locating his specific human experience within it. Quote, "My life has been tedious, confused, and occasionally quite nasty and hysterical. But I have never deliberately said anything without a lot of sincerity." It's from his poem Release, published in his first book. Oh, and did I mention hilarious? Because wit and intelligence always make one smile. There's a certain timeless wisdom to the self-awareness in these poems. How does he do that? Did he study Horace, Juvenal, Sir Walter Raleigh? Yes, I'm certain, all of the above. But the language would never let you know that, as it is a carefully de-schooled version of how this mid-20th century person actually spoke. In that regard, Schjeldahl, the poet, is very much part of a community, the second-generation New York school. But what really excites me is when the lines keep coming back to me, as they do repeatedly with Schjeldahl. I could quote the rest of Release, it's all memorable, but you get the picture. And not just memorable lines, memorable poems, too, are the stock in trade of the classicist, not to say the classic. Schjeldahl notches these up, too, with ease. From the middle years, the hilarious and moving sequence Dreams, some of which I hope he'll read tonight. But it's in his later poetry that Schjeldahl begins writing poems of remarkable depth and utility. Dear Profession of Art Writing, with its list of contemporaries with one-line tags, some positive, some not so. My Generation, and Dear Art of Verse. In his most recent book of poetry, The Brute, published in 1981 by Dennis Cooper's Little Caesar Press, which situated Schjeldahl in an edgier, younger group of up-and-coming poets, he has at least 3 masterpieces. I Missed Punk, I Remember Now Why I Left the Midwest, and my favorite, On Cocksucking, whose final lines come to me often and give me a sense that life's possibilities are truly infinite. Please welcome Peter Schjeldahl.
Gosh, he made me sound interesting. So I'm going to. I'm here because Vincent asked me, and because he insisted. I resisted. But we have a philosophical argument going, friendly. I hold that a poet is someone who writes poems, and that hasn't been me for over 30 years. And he takes the position that it's a lifelong honorific, like Kentucky Colonel, I guess. You know. And so I don't know, but it's hard, if not impossible, to say no to Vincent. And for the occasion, I dug out one of, if not the last poem I wrote in verse, and tinkered with it. And so, first time anywhere. It was started and first draft was written January 29, 1986. It was about a particular disaster that happened the day before. Challenger Elegy. The sound on the radio link up was a soft static crackle as the celluloid burning. Up there it had to be loud in the ears of no one. The boosters scampered off like terriers after sticks thrown by someone who falls dead. Smoke hung down like the hair of a good witch of the stratosphere. They knew nothing, gone as if not having existed while persisting. 2. Wasn't it lunacy to be riding 500,000 pounds of liquid fucking hydrogen to do what? In circles. Going to have gone. 3. As when Father drove the station wagon on our so-called vacations, and we'd have to look fast at things going by, if we looked at all, stupefied, because he hated stopping even for bathrooms. 4. The trajectory was so definite that even now the ghost of the shuttle describes its orbits with 7 ghosts inside it doing their duties, and tens of millions of children, including one whose father I am, watch television sets in their classrooms and take instruction from nice teachers instructed by NASA, telling them everything except what they'd really like to know, which is how in weightlessness you go to the bathroom. 5. The kids blinked, went blank, and waited for it to be something with words to it. Words for it. The teacher is standing there. I want to get Krista McAuliffe into this, nicest of teachers, smiling. But now, like my own childhood teachers, lost thoroughly, while I paid no or next to no attention. 6. After the third or fourth replay, I started to notice the beauty. We neglect to praise God for making the sky blue, of all colors, absolutely the right one, and clouds sumptuous, if not for the 7, recombinant matter in the deep Atlantic or on the thin winds of the upper air. 7. We felt that there was something we hadn't noticed, right under our noses, whisked away. As after a flicker of blankness, when something is said while you are not paying attention, and you ask for it to be repeated, but what repeats is your absent-mindedness. As if the universe developed a wrinkle and snapped it, hotel made smooth again. 8. I am here to say that I loved my teachers, a couple of them anyway, and have been ungratefully forgetful. I am here to state that Father driving the station wagon pleased me in ways that I am only now dimly aware of, though it wouldn't have killed him to stop now and then. I refer to the goodness in going, even if nowhere special, of a nice vague sensation of momentum when someone you trust drives, a feeling that you can't remember the start of and can't imagine ending. And should it go out in a cupola of flames, say, it couldn't help but continue, cradled in unknowing, as even now it continues, Father at the wheel and the sky so blue. Okay, that's it for the. Okay, that's it for the verse part. And I put together a little medley of things from. Let me see where have I done it? Have I done it all, or have I messed up and left? No, there it is. Thank you very much. I have a book coming out from Abrams called, this is a galley, called Hot, Cold, Heavy, Light, 100 Art Writings, 1988 to 2018, edited by the brilliant Jarrett Ernest, who couldn't be here tonight. And these are from columns, but I hope they have some literary value. The first is a paragraph from a review of a show of Piero della Francesca in 2013, and it mentions a dear friend who is gone now. One hot August when I was 23, I traversed Tuscany on the back of a Vespa driven by a painter friend, George Schneemann. We had seen Piero's magnum opus, The Legend of the True Cross frescoes in Arezzo, which I found bewildering, and then were headed northeast to the artist's hometown of San Sepolcro, the site of his famous Resurrection of Christ, the best picture in the world, according to Aldous Huxley, which I also failed to make much of. Then we stopped at a tiny cemetery chapel in the hill town of Monterchi to see Piero's highly unusual Madonna del Parto. An immensely pregnant but delicately elegant young Mary stands pensively in a bell-shaped tent as two mirror image angels sweep aside the flaps to reveal her. One angel wears green, the other purple. Here was a circumstantial drama of a ripeness with life in a place of death. George told me a sentimental, almost certainly untrue story, that the work memorialized a secret mistress of Piero's who had died in childbirth. This befitted the gesture, the picture's held-breath tenderness and its air of sharing a deeply felt, urgent mystery. In another age, the experience might have made me consider entering a monastery. Instead, I became an art critic. True story. There's a column in the magazine, in the weekly 7 Days, short-lived, from 1992, Fireworks. It is the 4th of July weekend as I write. Art is elsewhere, and what I like now is to set off fireworks. I'm talking backyard pyrotechnics with the traditional bottom-of-the-line ordnance, cheap little gunpowder devices that blow up, zoom skyward, and or emit colored fire, that is an everlasting miracle of human invention. Thank you, ancient China, for the firecracker, upon which no improvements are anticipated or desired. Thank you especially for what we term in our vernacular the bottle rocket, perhaps the world's single most satisfactory manufactured object. A contemporary bottle rocket, air travel brand made in Kwangtung, is a 2-inch long cylinder of paper wrap propellant and explosive attached to a splinter-thin, nearly foot-long, red-dyed stick. Stand it upright, ideally in a beer bottle, and ignite. Fizz, swish, trailing sparks and smoke. 100 or so feet up, a flash followed by a crisp bang. Then, if it's daylight, who can wait for night, you see the bare red stick drift innocently down. I know that fireworks can injure people, but so can a lot of benignly intended things in an accident-prone world. I know they are illegal in New York State, but I assume that law enforcers are embarrassed to deny us time-honored simple pleasures. Out of respect for the enforcers' feelings, I ignore the law. Acquiring fireworks has led me at length 2 years in a row to smiling Chinese women in Chinatown doorways, smiling perhaps because I am no kind of haggler. But even at sucker rates, bottle rockets should come to little more than a nickel a pop. You can get more potent items too, and I do. Rockets that scream, rockets that make semi-professional type fire flowers in the air, all manner of blazing gizmos that jump and spin, and fireballs spitting, thup, 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 Roman candles. The trouble with the more expensive things is that you get too precious about expending them, making sure that everyone is looking and so on. The optimum spirit of banging away is lost. I leave out the giant firecrackers like cherry bombs and M80s, silver tubes, whose waterproof fuses, when I was a kid, made for low-effort, high-yield fishing in the town creek. Their specifications approach the military's. Fireworks should be only dangerous enough to encourage presence of mind. Light a firecracker and quick toss it. Bang. A feathery burst of shredded paper. Repeat until sated. You would like to explode a few whole packs. Bang, 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 bang. But that's excessive, unless you could go all the way with it, as they do on Bayard Street. This is from a New York before your time, children. In Chinatown at the Chinese New Year. Dozens or scores of people on fire escapes throwing masses of crackers as fast as they can light them to feed a continuous roar, guaranteeing a year of good luck. After a day like that, it looks as if a red blizzard blew through. In this city, Bayard Street, knee-deep in drifts of fluffy red paper, is an annual spectacle as beautiful as Christmas lights on Park Avenue. Some will say that I would feel different if I had to live near Bayard Street. Some will be right. I do my exploding at an isolated rural place upstate in cahoots with my small daughter and nephew. To avoid feeling like an idiot, it is useful to pretend that your fireworks are for the entertainment of children. If you lack kids, borrow one. To the city-bound who suffer the din, I extend a sympathy that they may find unallaying. Now, some who are never wrong will say further that my joy in fireworks is regressive. You bet it is, and none too soon after dreary months of approximating grown-upness. With fireworks, I discover old, inchoate excitements probably pertaining to a boy's dim anticipations of sex. An idea supported by Alfred Hitchcock, eternal sniggering brat, when he mocked the coupling of Cary Grant and Grace Kelly in To Catch a Thief with cutaways to airbursts over Monte Carlo. Do-it-yourself fireworks satisfy a limited appetite for the pyromaniacal. Once a year is plenty for me. The craving is exacerbated, I find, by the academic splendors of professional displays, which delivers a vicarious arousal, an intrinsic bleakness of watching somebody else's fun. There are people out there shooting stuff off. I want to be one of them. The alienating beauty of the professional spectacle impresses without moving. It can make you feel dead inside. Emotion is added in dollops of sentimentality by reference to the ceremonial occasion. You may fall for this, as when, a few years ago, a centennial celebration of the Brooklyn Bridge was capped by having that adorable structure spew fire into the East River night. It's a matter of what symbols your heart will buy into. No such thematic necessity burdens 4th of July bottle rocketing, which is bang for bang's sake. Patriotism? Well, sure. It's a likable country that maintains such a tradition when you think of it, but you needn't. The point is not to congratulate America, but to go ahead and be an American in the classic mold, free, a bit obnoxious, and up for a good time. And this next thing is from 1992, and it's from a part of a catalog introduction I wrote for a show of the great sculptor Scott Burton, who was making things in concrete, and got me thinking about concrete. So I gave concrete its own section. I won't read the rest, which is really art criticism, which is generally not to be read aloud or read, to yourself while standing up. Okay. Concrete. Concrete is the most careless, promiscuous stuff until it is committed when it becomes fanatical. Liquid rock, it is born under a sign of paradox and does not care. It doesn't care about anything, lazy and in love with gravity, but only half in love. Pour concrete out on the ground and it will start to puddle and spread, enraptured by gravity, but then will think better of it. Enough spreading. Concrete can't be bothered. It heaps up on itself and glops, sensual as a frog. Concrete takes no notice of what is done with it, flowing regardless into any container. But the containers, the molds and forms, must be fashioned with laborious care, strong and tight, because concrete is heavy and feckless, promiscuous, doing what anyone wants if the person is strong enough to control it. Concrete is a slut, a gigolo of materials. Every other stuff, wood, clay, metal, even plastic, has self-respect, a limit to what it will suffer, and at the same time is responsive within that limit, supple in the ways it consents to be used. Not concrete. Concrete is stupid and will do anything for anyone without protest or pleasure. If the person will indulge its half-love of gravity, its passion for lying down, only give it a place to lie down of any shape and it will oblige. But let concrete set and note the difference. Concrete hardens in the shape of whatever container received its flow, its lazy abandon, in thoughtless submission to half-loved gravity. Once it has set, concrete becomes adamant, a Puritan, rock, Robespierre. It declares the inevitability, the immortality, the divinity of the shape assumed, be it a glopped heap on the ground or a concert hall. Concrete that is set will have no thought, no monomaniacal obsession until the end of time except that shape. No other material, not brook, not wood, not brick, not wood, not the stone blocks of the pyramids, forgets itself to such an extent. Bricks, planks, and blocks whisper from their configuration of a willingness to become something else, and the understanding that the fashioner will respect their dignity, their compunction against doing just anything for just anybody. Even whorish but ironic plastic demurs at the form it takes, ready if given some heat, some lovely heat to melt into another form. Likewise, metal and glass, not concrete when concrete has set. Set concrete insists, it extols the rightness, permanence, godliness of the shape into which it flowed. You must smash set concrete to bits if you would shut it up, and even then the smashed bits will lie around piping. I was in Berlin in 1989 and remember 100 hammers attacking the wall. The hammer said, die, die, die. The concrete said, wall, wall, wall. I brought fragments home, and the ones that retained any flat surface still shrilled in tiny voices, totalitarian for eternity. There is something not right about the notion of working concrete, finally finishing it, making its forms true, smooth, and elegant. This insults concrete's strength and simple-mindedness, mocking it as if by forcing fancy dress on a rough worker. Unlike the worker, however, concrete isn't truly mockable. It is impervious. Go ahead and make fun of it. Concrete won't notice. Concrete has no feelings to hurt. It does have feelings, as we know, but they are fanatic, untouchable by anything. Clay is touchy, wood is as woundable as the flesh that it is, and brick has a yeoman's pride, stolid and prickly. All have good reason to resent misuse and to exude sadness when misused. But kick concrete as much as you like, you will only hurt your toe. Concrete is the perfect exercise device for unrequited loving. It is like Don Quixote's Dulcinea, only colder. Coarse and stupid beyond compare. It combines those base qualities with the froidure of a goddess, of Pallas Athena. It is a dominatrix, blind, deaf, and dumb beyond anything. Concrete has its one fleeting moment of slovenly bliss, half giving itself gloppity-glop to gravity, and then it burns coldly forever with its idée fixe. You must be a masochist to love concrete, enjoying the strength of your capacity to love, that your capacity to love displays until your strength is exhausted when the loved one is a pitiless idiot. That was fun. Okay, last thing is a little longer. It's a column I wrote in 1993, which contains a bit of art criticism, so you'll have to indulge that. Early one morning in Washington, D.C. last week, I couldn't sleep and so went walking, traversing the mall in stagnant air that presaged a stifling day. I considered visiting Abe Lincoln's statue, but there looked to be about 100 more steps to it than I remembered. I slouched into the Vietnam Memorial. Already another light sleeper, a woman, was taking a grease pencil rubbing of a name. The memorial did not move me for once. It felt inoperative, as if unplugged. I reflected that public art looks futile without its power source, a crowd. The better, more sensitive the work, the more embarrassed it seems when deserted. You're not supposed to be alone with it. Everyone needs love. So does each thing that is made for other than expedient reasons. Each such thing implies the thought, they're going to love this. When nobody does, it's mortifying. I had a moment of seeing as unloved even the profound Vietnam Memorial, where the touching sight of the grease pencil woman palled as she industriously piled up one rubbing after another. There may be a market in them. Lack of love is a present plague. It rages in the art world. This past season of show was like an orphanage of the emotionally starved, some noisily acting out while most suffered quietly in corners. Many shows were likable, a grave condition. Merely to like an artwork is to acquire an awkward affection, as for a cute, not very bright cousin who is new in town and needs a place to stay. I may have thought of all this in Washington because the day before I had seen a show at Times Square. And here you have to remember the Times Square of yesteryear, about which some people are nostalgic, and they're crazy if they are. On 42nd Street between 7th and 8th Avenues, there are installations by over 24 artists sponsored by the 42nd Street Development Corporation and Creative Time, Inc. The artists are crows to urban carrion. Like leaking roofs, art and otherwise idle buildings means that the buildings are doomed. The present Death Watch Ensemble is a long way from a federal monument dedicated to remembrance. But in New York, it may make sense to have our commemorations, like everything else, on the fly. The works are mostly lame, as shocking as this judgment may be to all you lovers of recent public art out there. But a couple of installations by Jane Dixon and Karen Finley really do address things that are both specific to the place and universally meaningful, dreams of whores and keenings of the ravished. They're going to love this is not a thought associable with that perhaps over-famous block, whose edge on the world's innumerable similar strips may be just its presence in a city chronically full of writer flaneurs. This will open their wallets, is more like it. Itch and compulsion, a sin zone's flywheels, are considerations a lot more practical than love. They require no creativity, only powers of observation and a heart of stone. The romance for those susceptible is precisely a travesty of natural emotion. Ignored, yearnings desperate and tender hover like the foggy glow around neon signs. Half a snoot of alcohol enhances the mood, which can easily get you mugged. I was immediately enchanted by Dixon's installation, which dragoons a former porn parlor into service as a showcase for bridal fantasies. I initially abhorred Finley's, which transforms the defunct papaya world at the corner of 7th Avenue with a passion purple paint job and a mural of inept drawings and poems reeking of adolescent sentimentality. Dixon's work has stayed with me. Finley's has come to haunt me as I grasp its wavelengths with the living and dying street. No names of individual subjects appear in the two pieces because Times Square keeps no files on its casualties, but communal loss throbs in the temporary moments to temporary lives. Dixon is a veteran realist painter of demotic subjects. She has long lived near Times Square. The density of her experience gives weight to her installation. She has filled the windows of adult video world with backlit oval paintings on vellum of contented brides. Through the locked front door, we can peer into a cavernous space with booths and counters visible in subdued lighting. Stairs lead to a mezzanine. There is a spotlighted, resplendent effigy of a bridal gown made of transparent plastic. It rotates, shedding gleams of color like the rainbow hues of gasoline on water. Dixon's piece could be saying either that marriage is the opposite of prostitution or that marriage and prostitution are the same thing. I think she's impartial. Recreated in a museum, the work would be arch, but it hits home on stinking 42nd Street. Its double essences of peep and matrimony, cynicism and sorrow, are irony-free and pure in themselves while mutually lacerating. Dixon speaks in a public way to solitary woe. Finley whines and jabbers out of aloneness with no notion of where it ends and anything else begins. She is a remarkable figure in our culture. In performance, she combines astonishing charm with grating plaints of victimization. She is a doyenne of damaged lives, an avatar of every skeleton in every family closet, society's chickens home to roost. To call her authentic is to say the best and worst about her. I fled her papaya world piece, but it caught up with me. The clumsy figures in Finley's mural are idealized nudes of a man, a woman, and a child. They are accompanied by manic prose poetry of self-infatuation. I am a polka-dotted pony. Lollipops of cherry and grape adorn me. I am a bouquet for all mankind. The tone goes beyond gush. It seems mad. The impression is hardly elate when you register that the lollipops speckling the figures are Kaposi's sarcoma lesions. The AIDS element of positive attitude, not spelled out on sight, allows for a general resonance. The work's desperate upbeatness evokes a corresponding negativity, the inky shadow of persons as blighted as the mural is frisky. Aesthetic distance collapses. The installation becomes a sheer phenomenon, really happening in a real place, habituated by terrifyingly harmed people whom Finley reaches toward without condescension. A viewer is knocked sideways into awareness of a common humanity in need of uncommon, indeed practically incomprehensible compassion. The best that public art may offer now is a meditation in an emergency, exposing our lack of shared symbols, either public, to which we gladly pledge allegiance, or private, inviting soulful identification. Both kinds require that we welcome impulses of selfless participation, the spending of surplus love. Whose heart today sufficiently overflows? Maybe ask Abe Lincoln if you can stand the climb. Ask yourself. Keep asking.